So excited to hear his talk. I expect it to be great. Ladies and gentlemen, shoot.
Yeah, I mean, while we're talking, I think I was never quite sure. Like, I saw this topic, transitions, and I don't know whether it's a transition because I've been here a long time and they're trying to suggest to me that it's time to go, whether it's a transition because they put me as the last talk of the day when there's like no one around, and so it's transition to get to the dinner, whether it's like, so who knows, like with this sort of thing. But I just want to thank, the organisers for asking me to present, and then thank you to all of you for hanging around and indulging me and letting me tell you a few stories. Like, it's been I think you'll agree, it's a super awesome meeting, and it's always, a humbling experience to be able to actually participate. But I'm also super grateful for, see this thing? I got given this on day one of the meeting. I don't know why. Someone told me that it looked like that it was from The Bachelor. But then I kind of thought about it and I went, hang on, that doesn't make sense. The Bachelor, you give the roses, right? So that means, theoretically, I should be a participant on The Bachelorette. And then it suddenly made all sense to me. Because who do you think is the CWIS Bachelorette? Anyway. So I thought about this topic. And when I started to think about all the mentors, because I was tasked with it's about mentorship, and then I started to think about all the mentors that I've had through my life, and then I started to think, actually, you could go through the list, and then I started to think about why I consider these people my mentors. Like everyone, I've had coaches, supervisors, trainers, all sorts of things, but what was it that actually distinguished certain people to make me think that they're mentors? We saw from Dr. Langcake this picture about Mentor, the original Mentor. This is that trusted friend of Odysseus, who was tasked with guiding Telemachus, Odysseus' son, while Odysseus was fighting the war in Troy. Mentor failed, but he was wise, he was experienced. That's what we think mentors should be. And Telemachus remained ineffective until Athena took over the responsibility. So really we should, again, like what Mary said, we should be talking about Athenas. I'm going to be your Athena. So why did mentor fail? Was it a lack of engagement, or was it a lack of investment? Maybe it's because mentor didn't read the practical guide to mentoring. There's been a huge amount of work throughout corporate, medical, academic worlds describing the benefits of mentoring as well as how to be a good mentor. There's a whole science behind mentoring, and this includes the surgical literature. Although the idea of scientifically examining the concept of mentoring is good, I think that there's an intangible human aspect to it. The scientific approach to mentoring is kind of like a checklist. They list it out as a good mentor needs to be A, B, C, D, E. A good mentee needs to do X, Y, Z. I've had multiple instances of when I've been told, this person will be your mentor, or I've been told these are your assigned mentees. But it always struck me as somewhat odd. Just because I've been told that I'm your mentor, does that mean that I'm really a mentor? Despite having read that practical guide to mentoring, which I have. Will I really be able to provide all the things that mentors are supposed to do? Right? It kind of feels a little bit contrived. I look at it like speed dating. Not that I've ever done it. This is just what I've heard. Where it's an artificial environment specifically created to build a connection. And to me, that's why I believe the best mentors arise from connections that are made organically and relevant to your current situation. We all have mentors. Have you ever thought about why you've given them that label. I kind of think of it like, you know, the smell of rain, the taste of water, falling in love. We all know what those things are like, but it's really hard to describe. Good mentors come about because of kismet. And as I've transitioned through my professional career, I started thinking about, well, it's not just like that there's one mentor, right? We have different mentors at different stages, and that's why I thought about this transition. I've realized that at all these different stages, my outlook, my needs, my goals, they changed. And with that, the mentors have changed through that progression. I remember my very first mentor in medical school. His name was Dr. Michael Appelberg. He was a South African vascular surgeon and head of the vascular unit who was assigned as one of my surgical tutors when we started going to the hospital. I was absolutely terrified of him. He was an old school surgeon who did not tolerate fools. I remember watching him tear strips off the final year medical students when they inadequately presented their clinical assessment of the patient. He actually turned out to be the person that set me on the path to trauma surgery. After an absolutely woeful attempt at performing a clinical assessment of a trauma patient, where Dr. Appelberg was the simulated patient, he looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Congratulations, Jeremy, you've just killed your first patient." I was absolutely mortified, but then he followed this crushing statement up with something that I've never forgotten. He said, "Deaths in surgery occur because of omission, not commission. No surgeon ever intends to cause the death of his or her patient, but deaths occur because you've forgotten something or overlooked something. Attention to detail is paramount, and this will minimize the chance that you will omit something critical." Dr. Green, in his transition talk, described a memorable moment of error. This was my memorable moment, and I never wanted to go through that again. So I started reading everything I could about trauma. Just on that, I want to digress a little bit and talk about role models, because they're different to mentors, but they've got some of the same qualities. And I think it's important to distinguish the two. And so in my endeavour to learn everything that I could about trauma, I came across this website at that time when I was a medical student. It was called trauma.org. I bet you there might only be less than 10 people that know what that is. You have to remember, because this is way before any social media was available, the only thing I could play on my phone at that time was Snake, right? We had internet that provided lightning speeds of 8 megabits per second at that time. This is a long time ago. So therefore, no social media, no X, no nothing. We had an email discussion list, right? And that's what this trauma.org mailing list provided, a forum for discussion. So there'd be discussions on all aspects of trauma care: utility of mask suits, restrictive fluid, resuscitation, damage control, surgery, all that sort of stuff. And I remember seeing comments from Doctors Freiberg, Hauser, and Maddox. These were faceless names that I had no idea who they were until much, much later when I went, oh my goodness, these are like the big boys, the big, big boys in trauma. But I knew I wanted to be like them. Their discussions and answers were always referenced, and they were always supported by evidence. They never just threw out an opinion. They were role models to me as into how I aspired to practice. The difference is, though, that even though I was inspired by these wise and knowledgeable trauma surgeons, they weren't invested in me. There was no organic relationship, other than like me kind of being a bit of a lurker on that discussion list, which sounds a little bit creepy, but I promise it wasn't like that. You know, when I go back to Dr. Appelberg, he took an active interest in my progression through medical school. And while many others scoffed at my intention to pursue trauma surgery as my career, Dr. Appelberg provided guidance and advice about the pathway to surgical training and what key priorities there are at each stage. This is a photo of Groote Schuur Hospital in Cape Town, South Africa, where I spent 3 months with the trauma unit during my final year of medical school. When I spoke to Dr. Appelberg about my plans to do an elective, he said, "That's an excellent idea. Leave it with me. I'll make a few calls." Within a week, I'd received notification from the head of surgery at Huddersfield Hospital that my elective in the trauma unit was approved. Dr. Appelberg didn't have to do this. There was no direct benefit to him, but he did it anyway. This is what good mentors do. As Dr. Green in his talk mentioned, one must care, and I certainly felt that Dr. Appelberg cared. A recurring observation is that good mentors aren't just there for a specific purpose, and by that I mean that their job is done once you've successfully completed that. My mentors have adapted as I've transitioned through different stages. Dr. Appelberg was a mentor during medical school. He continued this through my first few postgraduate years in training. Dr. Appelberg was the one who advised me to pursue general surgery rather than orthopedic surgery as a means to reaching the goal of becoming a trauma surgeon. He was, of course, one of my first choices as a referee when I applied for general surgical training. This is a picture of my first published research paper. And Dr. Andrew Ellis is an academic military orthopedic surgeon at my hospital who tried his hardest to get me into orthopedic surgery. Again, he recognised my interest in trauma surgery while I was at the hospital and actively encouraged me to undertake research. I had very little idea at the time what this involved, and Dr. Ellis was my first research mentor. He guided me through the research methodology, but was very upfront about the expected outcome. He told me, this paper isn't going to change the world, but it is going to be very important for your development. I didn't exactly understand what this meant, but it turned out that this minor project paper started my academic career. Ironically, I still think it's the most cited paper that I've written as first author. Again, I saw Dr. Ellis as a mentor. He cared and was invested in me without expectation. Having said that, it was also my first experience with disappointing a mentor. When it came to the training program applications, I had to break it to him that I had decided on general surgery, not orthopedic surgery. I felt like I had let him down, but there was nothing but encouragement on his part. Good mentors don't hold grudges. They're invested in your development, not theirs. As I stated earlier, I firmly believe that a relationship with a mentor develops organically. Dr. Tony Joseph was an ER physician who directed the trauma service at the hospital where I did my internship in the first few years of residency. Again, the relationship started with him identifying that I had career aspirations in trauma surgery. Despite being in a completely different craft group, Dr. Joseph provided opportunities to develop my progression in trauma. He also mentored me through several research projects and was the first person to introduce me to the quality activities of a trauma service. You can imagine how intimidating it was as an intern to enter a trauma clinical review meeting surrounded by very senior clinicians from all specialties. Good mentors recognise what you need and work through the process, not all at once, but what's appropriate for the stage at which you're at. Good mentors also provide meaningful experiences. This is a photo of the Ryder Trauma Centre, where I spent 3 months as a PGY3 surgical resident. Again, this was an opportunity facilitated by Dr. Joseph through his contacts. He didn't have to do this. There were no tangible benefits to him. Dr. Joseph was also instrumental in assisting me with a travel grant for this experience. Seeing Dr. Lottenberg's presentation brought back fond memories for me about my time in Miami, especially the photo of Dr. Zepper carrying what we affectionately called the bricks. That was my job. I used to do that for those 3 months. Aside from the clinical experiences, which were unsurpassed, again, this concept of kismet is highly relevant. Sometimes you meet people who you don't know are going to be your mentors, but it happens organically. During my time at Ryder, one of the fellows that I worked with was Kenji Inaba. The clinical teaching was there as expected, but I had no idea at the time that Kenji would one day become one of my mentors who provided guidance later in my surgical career, as well as providing guidance today. I was actually supposed to go to USC for my fellowship, and Kenji had helped me with the planning, which started 2 years prior to actually me starting my fellowship year. Unfortunately, California licensing rules got in the way, made it impossibly difficult, and despite Herculean efforts, I ended up on match day with nothing. Call it fate, call it the universe, whatever. Harbourview had an unfilled position that year, and that's how I actually ended up there. I had a phone call from Dr. Ron Mayer, And I'm sure you all know Dr. Mayer. Doesn't get too excited, he doesn't mince words. And he said over the phone to me, "So, I hear you want to come to Seattle." I replied, "Yes, sir," and I was about to launch into my prepared speech about my passion for trauma and why it would be a good fit and all the other stuff. But Dr. Mayer, in his typical style, cut me off and said, "You know, if you screw it up, we're never taking another Australian again." This turned out to be a pivotal point in my career, an amazing group of faculty that were enthusiastic educators, but I keep coming back to the concept of an organic relationship. Dr. Joe Kushkieri was the program director of the fellowship, and despite me giving him constant headaches, heartburn, high blood pressure, and hair loss, that's his words, not mine, actively took an interest in my progression beyond the clinical development. He guided me through the administrative responsibilities that would be expected in a hospital leadership position. Good mentors are honest. After a frustrating meeting about implementing the on-cue pain catheter in the ICU, Dr. Kushkieri asked me to come to his office, where he said, "You can't just railroad an idea through, even though it's a good idea and you're right. The problem is, unfortunately, that most of the people in that room just aren't that smart. And even though it's obvious to you, they can't see it. You'll have much better success if you approach it differently." This pearl has stuck with me throughout my career. With Dr. Kushkieri, I could always walk into his office at any time and ask about anything. Clinical problems, research, which societies are good, which meetings are good. Anyone can give answers, but mentors give answers that are relevant to you. The importance of mentors providing opportunities cannot be understated. I respect Dr. Mayer's global awareness. He was always welcoming of discussions about international approaches and perspectives, but in particular, he identified what I needed to lead a trauma service when I returned home. I heard a great term at our CWIS board meeting earlier this week, and it was during my time at Harborview that I experienced being voluntold to write book chapters, papers, attend important meetings, etc. Mentors don't disappear when you finished that component of your life, when you met them. As a new attending, I was deeply appreciative of Dr. Kushkieri and Dr. Mayer just sending an email checking how things were going. Mentors are invested. One of the first tasks I set out to achieve when I returned home was to implement standardized processes of care, as had been the practice at Harborview. This was a fundamental shift in culture, as my hospital tended to adhere to the tenets of availability-based medicine, experience-based medicine, and eminence-based medicine. I had many discussions with Drs. Mayer and Kushkieri about how to make this change, and with their guidance, we managed to transform the approach to trauma at my hospital, so it's no longer about who was on call at that particular time or what time of the day it was when the patient arrived. You can see that's just a picture of the app, if you want to have a look at our app, which is what we use and what our residents use and the whole hospital uses for our trauma patients. Of course, as a starting attending, clinical advice is often needed, and with mentors, you know you can always ask and there will always be an answer. I'm grateful, and my patients are grateful for the availability of Kenji, Joe, and Ron, particularly in my early days as an attending. The concept of mentoring through transitions is important. Sometimes mentors don't really, they aren't really relevant to that particular stage of where you are now. It doesn't mean that I don't appreciate or respect them. It's just that the relationship has run its course. I think the term is unconscious uncoupling. There is no animosity because the relationship is altruistic at its core. Sometimes mentors have wisdom that does continue through transitions. I was nominated to become president of our Trauma Surgical Society, a few years ago. I had no aspirations for such a position and felt that there were many more suitable people for that position. Nevertheless, I did assume that position, and I was completely unsure about what to do. What are you supposed to do as a president of a surgical society? So I turned to my mentor, Dr. Mayer, who's been president of nearly every single surgical society that's available, and asked him, what do I do? And he gave me succinct, simple advice, typical of Ron. He said, it's pretty easy. Choose 2, maybe 3 things you want to achieve, and then find the people that can make it happen. I tried it, and it worked. As all good mentors do, Dr. Mayer checked in with me during my time in the position just to see how things were going. So I'm not allowed to name anyone in CWIS. That's what the instructions were. But I can say there are people I consider mentors. They may not know this. Maybe I should call them more like rock star idols instead. But I do really find them as mentors. It's an incredibly isolating and daunting experience to be the only surgeon in an institution that is performing a particular procedure. Right, that was the position I was in when I started SSRF after coming back from fellowship. In 2017, I came across a newly formed society called the Chest Wall Injury Society. I reached out to a former president, again, who shall remain nameless, asking if international surgeons could join the society. The response was encouraged and I believe essential to forming a robust and broad society. We are currently still working out the details for the website membership, so please stay tuned. In the meantime, I would like to introduce you to the CWIS Executive Director, Sarah Ann. I then met the CWIS group in San Diego at the American College of Surgeons Clinical Congress and subsequently attended my first summit in Park City in 2018. Through CWIS, I've built relationships with wise, invested, altruistic people that satisfy the definition of a mentor. I'm extremely grateful to these people who participate in my development. So to summarize, these are the consistent qualities of good mentors through my own observations and experiences. A mentor must have experience and the ability to impart wisdom relevant to you. There must be chemistry. I don't believe in assigned mentorship. A mentor must inspire because this results in motivation. A mentor must be invested in your development without ulterior motives. They must care. These are the qualities that I aspire to as a mentor. Thank you again for listening to my story.